This is a Renegade Media Network podcast.
Let me tell you guys about a sponsor of this show, and that is Zippix toothpicks. They are wonderful flavored toothpicks that have nicotine in each one. You can find them at zippixtoothpicks.com. A lot of you are probably trying to kick a bad habit here in the new year. These are a great alternative to that habit. And come on, let's face it. They're sponsoring this show, so you know that's a good thing. But I'm telling you, they're the cheapest alternative on the market. They've got flavors. Let me tell you, right here, I've got my packet. Zippix toothpicks, spearmint spice. I love this flavor. They've got whiskey flavor. They've got clove flavor. They want to sponsor shows like mine, so that should make you want to give them some business. They've got a promo code, a new one with the Counterflow podcast. The promo code is BUCK, B-U-C-K, of course. So go to Zippix Toothpicks. That promo code, BUCK, will get you 10% off of your order. Once again, zippixtoothpicks.com, promo code BUCK for 10% off your order. They're delicious. They got just the right amount of nicotine in them, and you will enjoy them. Kick that nasty habit, and let's get to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, cause I call him the hologram brass, but I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquids, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus, but I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow podcast. Glad to have you here. This is going to be a cool episode because I get to step out of the box a little bit. It's not just going to be about politics, but it's still a theme that I think a lot of you guys listening will appreciate. We want to own our own life, and we are responsible for our own health. And so I wanted to get someone that's very well respected and also just an all-around badass out there to discuss basically some health stuff. He's going to talk about the Carnivore Diet, and this guy's accolades are incredible. I tell him at the beginning here, I could do a Joe Rogan length episode on like just one of many aspects of Shawn Baker's life. My goodness. And at the end, we do get into some COVID type stuff. He has a lot of fun on his Instagram, his videos he puts out. And I saw him ranting about someone driving around with a mask on by themselves in their car. And so we get into some of that stuff too. I think y'all will enjoy that. It's the irony of some of the unhealthy people you might know, all of a sudden so concerned about what we're all doing with masks or no masks, or we should be staying on our couch all year and watching Netflix. I don't think so. And so we get into some of that too. Let me tell you about, I could go on and on about this guest, Shawn Baker. My goodness. Doctor of Medicine, Texas Tech. Well, he's a Texan. Oh yeah, and check this out. He's from Lake Jackson, home of the great Ron Paul. So, my goodness, orthopedic surgeon, distinguished graduate, U.S. Air Force Officer Training School, nuclear weapons launch officer, semi-professional rugby player in New Zealand, played in the Premier League and faced off against several New Zealand All Blacks, selected U.S. Air Force and Combined Military Services rugby squads, all Western USA Rugby Select, Texas Rugby Select, first place in Texas Strongman, 300-pound class, my goodness. Fifth place, USA Strongman Contest. American record deadlift at 772 pounds. 350 kgs for those of you in that world. Submaster world record deadlift at 738 pounds. I could go on and on. Highland Games, Masters National Champion. All of this accomplished as a lifetime drug-free athlete. I welcome to the show, Shawn Baker.
Shawn Baker, welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
I'm well. Good to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, sir. Thanks for doing it. So the nature of this show kind of is to bring on interesting guests whose lifestyle, philosophy, works, opinions, and so on run counter to the mainstream narrative, orthodoxy, that kind of thing. And I've been doing a lot of research on you, and you seem to fit that bill quite well. Do you see that as well about yourself and your lifestyle and the things that you promote?
Well, I mean, to a certain point, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly counter to some of the mainstream thinking. I think some of what I do is right in line with most people would agree with, but I do sort of have a nutritional philosophy that I think many people would sort of at least raise their eyebrow about.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to get into some of that. This is the first time I've had you on, so I like when that happens. I like to give my listeners a background. Honestly, your background's fascinating. I could probably do 3 hours on many different aspects of who you are and what you've done, but kind of give them, my listeners, what your life's journey's been and what you do.
Well, I mean, I guess I'll start, grew up in Texas, kind of the same place you are. I went to town, lived in a town called Lake Jackson, Texas, which is kind of on the Gulf Coast area, just kind of near Houston. And went to college, kind of traditional things, studied biology, went into medical school. Just after the first year of medical school, I picked up playing rugby, and just naturally I was a good athlete, and got recruited to go play kind of professionally in New Zealand. So I ended up dropping out of medical school to go play rugby, which is kind of a tough decision. A lot of people thought I was crazy for doing that, but I did. I enjoyed it, and then I went in and joined the Air Force when I came back, so I could continue to play rugby after I left New Zealand. Because in the United States at that time, this is in the early '90s, rugby wasn't particularly well supported, but the military had a pretty good program, so I joined. That was my rationale for joining the military, quite honestly. But I also, my day job was to launch nuclear missiles. I was a nuclear missile launch officer, and so I spent a lot of time up underground in Wyoming in these launch control centers, for about 5 years up there. Played rugby for the Air Force team, the Armed Forces team, and various other, all-star teams throughout the U.S. And then at the end of that time, I went back to medical school. The military was kind enough to pay for that. I continued my athletic endeavors during that time. I kind of took up, I think, powerlifting, setting some national and state records in world records in strength training, and did some deadlifts. I got up to a 772 pound drug-free deadlift, back in 2000. And that was, I think, the top I'd done at that. So then like I said, then I went back to medical school, was sent to Afghanistan, did a bunch of, trauma, wartime combat trauma surgery, some crazy stuff, from an orthopedic standpoint, a lot of mass casualty stuff that we were taking care of. Came back, went back into civilian practice when I got out of the military. I was continuing as an athlete. I think I transitioned from powerlifting, and then I went into something called the Highland Games, which is you put on a kilt and you throw heavy things, and you throw like cabers, which look like mini telephone poles, and you throw rocks, you shot put things, and throw hammers, and these weights with 56-pound weights with one arm. And I ended up winning a world championship in that as well. And then then from the athletic standpoint, I transitioned into this rowing sport, this competitive rowing with this Concept 2 thing, what many people are familiar with CrossFit will know. And there's thousands and thousands of people that compete on that thing, and ended up setting 3 world records and won a world championship in that as well. And that was as a carnivore athlete, on a completely carb-free diet. I continued, in my career, as an orthopedic surgeon, I was a very busy surgeon, very sought after surgeon, very popular surgeon in town. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the time. And I discovered, despite all the athletic stuff and the training I was doing, I was starting to develop issues with regard to my health. There was, I was seeing things like sleep apnea, metabolic syndrome, probably pre-diabetic. I was probably, I was close to 285 pounds at 6'5". And I said, I think it was like 42, 43. And I said, well, I got to make a change. So I started playing with diet. I went on a low fat, low calorie, lots of vegetables, lots of fiber, a little bit of lean protein diet. Managed to lose weight. I mean, it worked. I got down to 230, got really lean, and was completely, absolutely miserable. I mean, I was just like, I was grumpy, I was grouchy, I was hungry all the time. The nurses said, hey, we really liked Dr. Baker when he was fat a lot better because you weren't such an asshole. But I mean, that was the truth of the matter. I was just pissed all the time because I was hungry. So I realized that it wasn't sustainable for me. So I switched, and I went through a journey where I went on more of a Paleolithic diet, and then a low carb ketogenic diet. I did that for several years, felt pretty good. And And then I just discovered this, this sort of group of people that were just eating meat as a diet. And, just objectively listening to them and watching them and observing them for about a year, I said, this is something I'm just going to try. And kind of as a whim. And I kind of read some of the historical stuff, some of the athletes in the past that have used meat-based diets to succeed, bodybuilders like, I'm blanking on his name right now, but anyway, but they use the bodybuilders from the 40s and 50s were using meat-based diets largely and getting very good results with that. So I, as an athlete, I tried that. So I did it for 30 days and I was on social media at that point. Had a little bit of a following, a few thousand people. And, we were kidding, what am I going to die of in those 30 days of just eating meat? Am I going to get a heart attack? Is my colon going to fall out from no fiber? Am I going to get scurvy? None of that, of course, happened. I mean, I felt fine. I felt great. And then, I kept doing it. I went back to, I did 30 days and then I went back to my regular omnivorous diet and I immediately felt worse. It was just immediately. I was like, wow, all the things that got better immediately came back. And I was like, I really prefer to feel good. So I went back to this meat-based diet and eventually I got, hundreds of people to try it and they were all starting to report the same thing. Hey, my knee stopped hurting. I lost weight. I got leaner. My skin got better. My autoimmune issues got better. My guts got better. So we ended up doing a little small kind of online study and we got 100 people to do it, tracked them for 3 months and they lost weight. They all lost about, on average 30 pounds. They lost weight, size off their waist. Their blood pressure improved. Their pulse rate went down. All the subjective markers of health improved. It was, we didn't have any money to do this. We did this and it got the attention of a guy named Joe Rogan, who had me on his podcast. I went on Joe's podcast. And then a lot of people started to hear about it or hear about me. And then, so I've just kind of steadily done that, and have grown that since that. And at this point, I wrote a book, Carnivore Diet. A lot of people have read that. I've enjoyed that. It's now translated in a number of languages throughout the world. We've got a company called MeatRx where we have thousands of members that are all, just getting healthy. And this is something that I think is really, really exciting. So that's kind of where I'm at today.
I know you hear tons of questions on, hey, can I have this during this diet? And from what I have seen of you discuss it, you're not super like, hey, it has to be this way or else you're not really a carnivore diet person. What's basically the confines of the diet? Is yours specific to just you? How do you lay out the carnivore diet?
Yeah. So when I give lectures on this stuff, I go and talk, through different places in the world, although recently it's been hard to do because of the coronavirus stuff. But, I just tell people, look, the diet is based on animal foods. I mean, when the assumption is that animal source nutrition is the pinnacle of human nutrition. And I think there's a lot of evidence that would support that. And so that's where the nutrition is truly coming from. Now, what you can add to that is going to vary. Some people will tolerate a small amount of plant material, whether it's for seasoning or for variety or for potentially some benefits, that's fine. I typically say, focus your nutrition, make sure you're getting your nutrition, your complete nutrition from animal source foods. The other things you can either limit or eliminate as needed. And the goal is health. It's not to save the cucumbers or any other goal. And the goal is purely health related. It's not the opposite. It's not the opposite of veganism. It's not like reverse veganism where I'm trying to save all the plants or anything like that. I'm trying to save the humans, maybe. I'm just like, what's your goal? And we fully encourage people to go on the diet. You might have to do it strict for a period of time and then, see what you can do, see what you can add in. Some people choose to, some people don't. Some people add things back in and they continue to do well. Other people add things back in and they don't feel so good. So it's just whatever's going to work for you in the long term. So it's very much, I guess it's individualized, but it's based on results. And I think that's how we should approach things. And instead of having a strict set of rules,
right,
we can have some frameworks and some guidelines. And again, I will argue all day long that humans are well suited to digesting and thriving on meat. And I think that it really is a one true superfood if we want to talk about superfoods.
Yeah. And I would say I'm, for the most part, into the ketogenic diet. And of course, or Cheeto as when I cheat, but they seem to be bigger in the keto world on emphasizing grass-fed's the big thing. That's very important. And I think I've heard you say, well, maybe not, kind of do what works for you. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think you have to sort of look at why people are saying that. If you're saying that grass-finished beef is better for the environment, I think you can make that argument. I think you can clearly make that. Well, I mean, in part, it depends on how the grass-finished, because a grass-finished cow can be very destructive to the planet, depending on how it's pastured. If it's not moved appropriately and efficiently, and because a lot of ranchers that say, "Oh, I'm grass-finished," and what they do is they'll do something called the Christopher Columbus method, where they stick them out in the pasture in May and they don't see them again until October. And the cows will just eat down the ground to bare dirt because they'll eat the stuff they like. And what it does is actually ruins the soil. So that's actually bad for the environment. And they actually produce more methane than animals in a feedlot, believe it or not. So grass finish doesn't always equate to better environmental things. Now, if you take those same animals and you put them on a paddock and you fence it off and you move them every day, every 2 days, that is actually better for the environment. So the environmental argument is definitely there. When it comes to human health, you can take a piece of grass-finished beef and you take a piece of grain-finished beef, and there are nutritional differences. There clearly are some differences. You can say, well, the grass-finished beef has higher omega-3. It has more vitamin A, more vitamin E, more zinc. Those are all great things. Now, what happens when you feed humans grass-finished beef versus grain-finished beef? We don't have a lot of research on that. We have very few studies. Texas A&M did a study about 7 or 8 years ago, didn't find a difference. There was, in fact, the grain-finished beef came out slightly better in what they measured, which were blood lipids and I think blood pressure, but not significant. It was like real no difference. I've done survey data on something like 12,000 people on this diet. No difference really between the outcomes. Harvard University, who's about to publish a study on the carnivore diet, I've seen their data because I helped them to organize, the participants. They shared with me the data, and I asked them. I told them, hey, make sure you ask this question about grass finished versus grain finished. The same thing with organ meats. Do they eat organ meats or not? Because there's a lot of people that debate the essentiality of one or the other, and their results are going to show there's no difference. And so, I mean, I just will say what the results are. Now, I understand why you may want to say I prefer to eat grass finished, but to say it's for your health, I don't know that there's a great deal of data that supports that. To say that it potentially will benefit the environment, yes, depending upon how it's raised. Now, I'm a very big proponent of regenerative agriculture, not just grass-finished beef. I think you have to look at, are you actually creating biodiversity? Are you capturing soil carbon? That to me is an argument. We should make that argument. But the health argument, I just haven't seen it bear out in my case, in thousands of other people's cases. It's not to say there aren't certain people that will say that I feel better when I eat grass-finished beef, but equally there are people who say I feel better when I eat grain-finished beef. So, you can't just take the one person's argument. And there's people that have an agenda. Often it's a financial agenda. They want to sell you some supplement or sell you their product. And of course, they're going to say it's better than everything else. But I mean, the results are the results. And that's what I'm going to, that's what I continue. That's what guides me, is saying, these are results people are getting. Until you can show a clear difference, I'm not gonna jump up and down and scream one's better than the other.
Let's talk about the official coffee of the Counterflow podcast, and that is Lorenzotti Coffee. These guys are loyal supporters of this show, and I'm thankful because their coffee is in my coffee mug every morning. Once I changed the name of this show, that of course I'm bringing them over with me. They are hardcore libertarians, great supporters, and their coffee is so damn good. It's imported directly from Italy. They've got a great shop over at lorenzotti.coffee, LORENZOTTI.coffee. And on there, you can find all kinds of stuff, including this great looking coffee bean grinder that I need one of those. They've got nice looking tins that you can get the coffee and store it in if you'd like. They've got giant bags, medium bags, bundled packages so you can order several at a time, all vacuum sealed, of course. And since they support me here, you guys get a discount when you use promo code BUCK, B-U-C-K. That is promo code BUCK, and you will get 10% off of your order. If you want delicious coffee and you like this show, go to lorenzotti.coffee and use promo code BUCK to get 10% off of your order. You'll be supporting the Counterflow podcast and the great liberty-minded company of Lorenzotti Coffee.
Do a lot of people that get into the carnivore diet do it for inflammation reduction reasons? And if so, I also get into, so my listeners are thinking, what does that mean? because inflammation seems to present itself in so many common ways that some people might go, I do have that. Can you talk about the ways in which inflammation does present, and then how this diet can help that?
Yeah, so I think we have to distinguish between acute inflammation and chronic inflammation. When I exercise, I experience inflammation, but that's okay. When we eat transiently, there's some inflammation that occurs. That's also likely okay. Chronic inflammation, I've got this chronic infection or this chronic heart disease or chronic vascular inflammation. Those things are bad. So you have to distinguish between, chronic and acute inflammation, just like stress. There's good stress, there's bad stress. Having said that, in one of the ways we evaluate inflammation are through these blood marker values, one of them being C-reactive protein. When I see people go on a carnivore diet, almost invariably, particularly as enough time passes, we see those markers of, clinical markers of lab tests normalizing. If the C-reactive protein was elevated, it often drops. It's not, that's typically the case. But importantly, what does inflammation look like? Well, it could be back pain. It could be knee pain. It could be skin rashes. It could be digestive discomfort and pain. It could be mental, cognitive things. Those are all related to chronic inflammation. And we do see those things normalize and resolve on a carnivore diet all the time. In fact, it's probably one of the most, one of the better reasons to do this. I mean, there's a lot of ways to lose weight. There's a lot of diets you can lose weight on. There's a lot of diets where you can improve your blood sugar control. Inflammation, well, we do know, for instance, if you have a lot of excess adipose tissue, whether it's visceral fat or subcutaneous fat, there are inflammatory cytokines that are associated with that. So losing body fat does help. So any diet will theoretically reduce inflammation that way, but uniquely and probably with a greater magnitude, I see people on a carnivore diet just smash it out of the park when it comes to these, these inflammatory diseases, some of these autoimmune diseases, which often overlap, things like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease and rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis and, Hashimoto's thyroiditis and all these things. We see them getting better all the time, every day. I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of success stories over at MeatRx you can read. You just go pop on our website, look at the success stories, and they're cataloged. They're by all the categories, boom, 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 arthritis, depression, GI disease, mental health, it's all, there's hundreds of categories with hundreds and hundreds of stories on that. Research is coming. There's a research paper just studied on SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, out of Sweden on carnivore diet, 100% cure rate with the group they used. So, it's coming. We're getting more data on this stuff, so it's exciting.
Where does alcohol, if at all, fit into this diet?
Well, alcohol is not a health food. There's some study on moderate drinking, and life extension. I think that's probably reflective more of wealth than anything else. I don't consider alcohol a health food. Having said that, there's a reason to do it. There's social reasons. Sometimes it's pleasurable. it's an activity some people like. I don't drink much, quite honestly. I'm usually too concerned about athletic performance to be impaired by drinking. The interesting thing is that we know that saturated fat, and obviously a carnivore diet is going to have some decent amount of saturated fat in that, actually mitigates alcohol damage, ethanol damage to the liver. We know that from animal studies and human studies. So we know that, like, say, if you have a glass of wine, you pair it with a steak, you're probably seeing less ethanol-related damage to the liver. So there is perhaps a protective effects with alcohol. It doesn't mean, it gives you license to go out there and smash a six-pack every night just because you're eating meat. But I think within reason, it may be something that mitigates alcohol. But again, I don't consider alcohol a net benefit. It's, if you choose to do that, it's like, hey, it's like not getting, you want to stay up late past your bedtime, you make that decision, you're going to have a consequence to it.
You also do intermittent fasting, is that correct?
Well, sort of. What I would say is I do more of something that's called physiologic fasting. And that just means I tend to eat when I'm hungry, which makes sense. That's how most animals on the wild do that. Sometimes, there's some convenience factor that, I don't sit there typically with a stopwatch and say, it's 16 hours and 22 minutes and I can't eat for another 1 hour and, 38 minutes because, it's not my window yet. If I'm hungry and it's, I'm not going to wait an extra hour just to magically hit some number. I think our diet should provide enough satiation so that we don't feel like we have to eat every 2 hours like many of us do. And so, like for instance, today, and this will sound a little nutty to people that aren't familiar with me, but I got up this morning, I cooked up 5 pounds of steak, and I had it for my breakfast. I ate the whole thing, ate 5 pounds in one sitting. And that's pretty routine for me. I mean, most days it's 4, but I ate a little more this morning because I'm a little hungrier. I probably won't eat again today. I mean, I'm not hungry now. It's been 6 hours since I ate that meal. Likely I won't eat. I won't need to eat. I mean, I've already consumed 4,000 or 5,000 calories, right? And that works fine. And some days I'll do two meals a day. It just depends on the schedule. Right now, I'm liking that because I don't have to clean so many dishes. I go outside on my grill, I got this big giant cast iron. I had to get a pizza pan that was cast iron because I couldn't fit enough steaks in a regular cast iron pan. So I cook it up, I eat it, and that's it. But like I said, I think that your diet should lend itself to infrequent meal patterns. And if you're on a high carb diet, it's very hard to go 6, 8, 10, 12, 16 hours between meals. It really is. I can do that effortlessly. If you told me tomorrow you don't get to eat, I'd be like, okay, that's no big deal. I wouldn't freak out. I think that's one of some people talk about the term fat adaptation because I know I can live off my own fuel, my own body fat. I mean, it's not my preference. I don't want to sit there. I prefer to eat tomorrow if I can, but it wouldn't be the end of the world to me. Now, if you tell many people, hey, well, guess what? Tomorrow you're not eating. That'd be anxiety provoking for a lot of people. Most people are like, oh my God. So that means, that's my little fat adaptation, Rorschach test, so to speak. It's like you can either do it or you can't, or it's easy or not.
I want to ask you about drawbacks you personally see from the diet versus also one's pushback that you get from I don't know, activist groups or angry mobs. But first, let's get to what drawbacks do you see, if any, to a carnivore diet?
Well, I mean, personally, for me, drawbacks, they're more social. They're not any physiologic things. I don't feel bad at all. I don't have any, issues. The social things are, depending on what you want to eat. If you're eating nice steaks all day long, it's expensive. You don't have to do that. You can certainly do it with ground beef and eggs. Do it pretty cheaply. Convenience as far as, I'm fortunate that I work largely from home, so I have access to cooking facilities all the time, so I can cook myself. But if I was traveling, if I was dependent upon restaurants, it gets expensive. For me to order 5 pounds of steak at a restaurant, that's going to cost a lot of money. So, I'm not likely to be able to do that. So I might just, in that case, I might just go to Wendy's and order, 12 burger patties or something like that instead. But and that's perfectly legitimate. You can go in there and you can order that for, $15 and you have a huge 3 pounds of meat, and for, cooked meat for $15, that's a steal. You think about that. That's a day's worth of nutrition for most people. That's, like I said, I think those are the drawbacks as far as it's concerned for me. I haven't really experienced any problems beyond that. Pushback. Yeah. There's a lot of people push back. There's misconceptions about it. You're going to be constipated all the time. That doesn't happen. I can guarantee that. There's people, we don't hear the same thing with people going fasting. We don't hear the cries about constipation, and you think about it, it's really the same sort of mechanism. When you're fasting, you still have bowel movements. They're not as frequent because, you're not getting much stuff. But what's in that bowel movement when you're fasting? Well, it's epithelial cells from the lining of the gut. It's bacteria from the microbiome. That's what's coming out when you're fasting. So when you eat meat, it's basically the same thing, because meat is pretty much all absorbed by the small intestine. It doesn't even really make it into the large intestine. So you've got just a tiny amount of stuff that makes it through. So you don't really go to the bathroom as much. And so some people are worried about constipation, which really you're just not making as much waste. You think about it, when you're on this high carb, high fiber fruit and vegetable, all these organic fruits and vegetables, which half of them end up in the trash because they go bad before you can eat them, and the other half ends up in the toilet because you can't digest them. So it's really an inefficient source of food if you think about the way we do that. Then there's people to push back about heart disease and cancer, particularly colorectal cancer. Again, if we look at the nutrition science, it is abysmally poor science the way it's done. If you look at these, most of it's nutritional epidemiology. If we look at the way epidemiology is done, some people send out an FFQ, a food frequency questionnaire. Hey Buck, what did you eat? How many blueberries did you eat in the last 6 months? you're going to be guessing. You're not going to know for sure. I mean, the accuracy rate on that is extremely low, and most likely you're going to overestimate for good things. We know that people overestimate fruits and vegetables. There was a study looking to validate the FFQs I saw, and people were overestimating fruits and vegetables 83% of the time. So these numbers are all skewed. They're not right. They're not accurate. And then they take these numbers and then they try to make correlations between that. And the correlations tend to be very weak. So they say, well, these people eat more meat, we think maybe because they think they remember to eat more meat, have a slightly higher rate of colorectal cancer, and therefore meat causes cancer. And you can't make that assumption, but that's what's being done. More recent studies, have come out looking at that, and they've just said, look, based on the strength of the evidence, nutritional epidemiology, in fact, in particular, there's really no good evidence to suggest that. And this is somebody, guys like Gordon Guyatt. Gordon Guyatt was he's basically the father of evidence-based medicine. He basically made the term evidence-based medicine back in 1991. He came up with that term. He's been studying this stuff for 30 some years. And his conclusion was red meat does not cause cancer, does not cause heart disease. Any evidence that suggests it does is extremely weak. And this was very controversial, came out in 2019. And, the vegans all freaked out and sued petitioned the FTC to have those 6 studies pulled from the literature because they disagreed with it, of course. But that's the way it is. I mean, meat doesn't cause cancer. Meat doesn't cause heart disease. Now, you can argue about saturated fat and these things, but much of the saturated fat we eat is in conjunction with processed food. You look at the way we eat these these nutrient components. We eat them in very specific ways that may not be related. Meat from saturated fat from meat and eggs and butter and cheese and milk and chocolate are not the same thing as those that are found in Oreos and Twinkies and all this other crap. So it's a lot of nuance to this stuff that people aren't looking at or willing to mention.
When I was researching you, I don't know if you're familiar with a page called Rational Wiki, but I have found when I research people and they're listed on there, oftentimes they're interesting people and there's all kinds of strange slurs about them. But it said something that you are a troller of vegans online.
Well, I mean, certainly I support anyone's ability to be a vegan. If you say I want to be a vegan, I'm saying go for it. It's good for you. I think it's a stupid diet, and I think you're going to not do well on it. But you're right. You're welcome to do a vegan diet. I'm not out there trying to pass laws to outlawing vegetables and outlawing beans and trying to make fake vegetables out of meat and that stuff and trying to sell it to you for a huge markup. Having said that, the converse is not true. We have people on there that are out there calling me a murderer and a rapist because I eat meat and drink dairy and I'm killing people and I'm the worst person in the world and I deserve to roast in hell and all this bullshit. And I'm just like, look, I'm going to push back against that stuff because I went on Rogan's podcast, just telling my story. Hey man, I ate meat and I felt better. I've seen other people feeling better. Not controversial. Well, I mean, I didn't do that to troll anybody, but the amount of hatred and death wishing and all that stuff I got thrown my way, just was like, wait a minute, these people are not only wrong, they're crazy and they're very malicious. So I will push back on that. And because they put out a lot of, even the vegan doctors, I mean, they have an agenda and they claim they're surrounded in science, and what they do is they use they cherry pick the science, or they interpret the science in a way that's favorable to them, or they ignore certain aspects of the science. And so I sort of will point out where I think they've left out information. I'll point out studies that contrast what their points are. I'll do that in a way. We live in an age of social media, and some of it is memes, and some of it is just humor, and some of it is just controversial stuff that gets people's attention. If I sat there and just put up studies and just put, here's the title of the study and here's my interpretation, no one cares about that stuff. I mean, it's like,
right.
It doesn't move the needle. And I think we need to move the needle. And I think this is something that my maybe it's military background, competitive sports background. If you're going to fight, you need to bring the right weapons. You bring a knife to a gunfight, you're going to get your ass kicked. And so I'm like, look, you got PETA out there putting out this bullshit ads about, 2 guys laying in bed with a pig in front of them saying, oh, meat's ruining your sex life. And I'm like, that's total crap. I mean, it's just not even grounded in any truth whatsoever. And, you know, they get away with this propaganda, and they've got millions of dollars in financing to do that. And this other side, we've got nothing. We got ourselves. So I've got to be the doctor, the cheerleader, the marketing guy. I've got to do it all, basically. So, and I do. And so, I mean, fortunately, more and more people have started to, you know, see what I'm saying has at least some degree of truth to it. And they're starting to agree.
I got to tell you guys about a great sponsor of the Counterflow podcast, and that is Paloma Verde over at palomaverdestore.com. They sell wonderful CBD products. I'm not kidding. I used their CBD. It's like a cool menthol sports cream. I put it on my lower back the other day because I had some back pains. The stuff works unbelievably. Right then and there, I was so glad that these guys are sponsors of the show. I had to make this commercial, a new one for these guys, just to rant and rave about that sports cream. It's unbelievable. They've got CBD gummies, CBD pet products, of course. Of course, they've got the CBD tinctures, some soft gels, some salve. I've also used the melatonin CBD soft gels, and they're quite good as well. Nothing's quite like that sports cream to me. Nothing. It's just unbelievable. I almost wanted my back to hurt again so I could use it some more. Carlos and Vanessa out of San Antonio, Texas, this is their store. It's a small business. They're willing to sponsor a show like this. They want to give you guys a discount. So when you use promo code BUCK, B-U-C-K, you'll get 25% off of your order if it's over $75. And if it's your first order, sign up for their email list. That's an extra 10% off, combined to a total of 35% off. These guys are wonderful people out of San Antonio, Texas. Support them. It supports this show as well. palomaverdestore.com, promo code BUCK, B-U-C-K, at checkout. And I'm telling you, get that sports cream. You will not be sorry. Let's get back to the show.
Something I've seen way too much, certainly over the last year, is that a lot of people that never worry about how they treat their bodies, diet-wise, exercise-wise, they were all of a sudden, this is a bit of a shift in direction, but I have a purpose for it. They're all of a sudden screaming online and in real life, unfortunately, about probably you, me, should wear a mask, sit in our home, not go outside, and not be selfish. And it seemed a lot of the people I saw doing that were yelling at me, and I'm like, you've never cared about your health. You know, why now all of a sudden you think we should just all mask up? And I've heard you talk, and it's made me laugh on your Instagram stories about you know, at this point, what more could they tell you to do that you would do it? There's people driving around by themselves in a car with a mask, not realizing the windshield would probably, you know, block COVID rays. But talk a bit about that. And have you noticed any trend with it being people that normally weren't particularly concerned about health, all of a sudden now yelling about it?
Yes, I mean, that's clearly there. I mean, there are people that, you know, clearly don't care about their health based on where they're at health-wise. I mean, you know, they care about comfort. They care about existing. You know, I mean, they care about being able to sit there and watch Netflix and stuff their face with Cheetos and Twinkies and ice cream, and that they consider an existence worth keeping. So, I mean, they care about not dying and not necessarily they're being healthy. You know, I think it is particularly galling that we are not taking advantage of this pandemic to address human health, particularly population health, on a more holistic way. I mean, you know, the fact that whether masks work or not, I think it's at best controversial. Whether vaccines are going to make a difference or not is at best controversial. I mean, I see arguments on both sides, and I'm not saying I'm an expert on either of these things, but certainly what's not controversial is people that are sick metabolically, chronically, do better when they're healthy. You know, in day-to-day activities due to COVID-19 or any other infectious disease. And the fact that we are not aggressively, the fact that, you know, Trump or Biden or Fauci is not every day telling Americans, hey, get up, go outside, walk for 20 minutes, Put away the junk food, stop buying processed food. That should be, I mean, I've got billboards down the highway, these road warning signs. Don't forget to put on your mask, social distance. Every store you go into. I mean, I was on the radio, and the text on the radio, it scroll by the name of the artist of the song, and they would say, hey, sneeze into your arm, or just these reminders everywhere. We're being inundated with it. The least they could do is say, hey, maybe should not eat all that junk food. Hey, maybe you should get a little exercise. I mean, there'd be no extra additional cost to that. In fact, it would be less cost probably. We would likely move the needle on this stuff, and we in a more meaningful way, in a more lasting way. I mean, this would be a perfect opportunity to have every the sad thing is, you and I are both in America right now, in the U.S., and we're a wealthy nation. I mean, we're an incredibly wealthy nation. At least we are for now. Maybe that'll change in the future, but we have all unlimited resources, and yet we have a population of chronically sick, fat, depressed, tired, weak people. That should not be the case. We should be literally a nation of strong, robust, athletic, healthy, and I'll add to that, happy people. And I would say that, we talk about environmental stuff, because this is the next emergency, is the climate emergency. Sick people are a climate disaster. If you want to make that argument, we know that the hospital system puts out 10%, or the U.S. healthcare system is 10% of our greenhouse gases. Cows are 2%, just to put it in perspective. Medical waste is atrocious. I mean, when I used to operate in the operating room, I mean, there would literally be like 6 or 7 of those giant 55-gallon trash cans filled with junk every time I did an operation. And then I might do 5 or 6 a day. I mean, this is one operating room out of 10 or 20 in the hospital. I mean, and that's not including all the stuff in the hospitals. So the more people in the hospitals, the more people that are sick, the more greenhouse gases, the more trash. What if we cut that back? I mean, it's not to mention the fact we spent $3.5 trillion in direct healthcare spending in the U.S. Indirect healthcare costs are something like 50% of our GDP. Can you imagine how much better off we would be if we just had a healthy society? And so instead of, just here's another pill, everybody waiting anxiously for the next weight loss drug, or the next diabetes pill, or psoriasis pill, or rectal itching pill, or, whatever, it's just bullshit. I mean, it's like, why don't we put the message behind that? And the reason we don't is because pharmaceutical lobbies are the most heavily lobbied, industry in the United States. They spend $300 million a year on federal lobbying. That's just what they report. That's just the above board stuff. The stuff that's going on behind the scenes is massively beyond that. So, I mean, this conflict of interest, it's massively a problem with the government. I think we have to have a consumer revolution. We have to have people that are willing to stand up and say, look, I'm started. I'm not going to eat more processed food. I'm done with the garbage. I'm done with your pills. I'm done with your drugs, to the degree and extent that I can be. And we have to take it back. Are people willing to do that? A lot of people are out there. Like I said, these people that are comfortable to stay in their home, look at Zoom all day, watch Netflix, order Amazon, Uber Eats, and eat junk food. They're comfortable. Yeah. Can you mobilize those people to do anything? I don't know. That's the question. Because, you have when you talk about revolution and changing things, you hear about these starving masses, the people in Iran, rising up against the government, these revolutions, these are starving people. We don't have starving people. We have fat, overfed people. They're not too willing to rise up, because they're like, as long as you keep feeding me my Coca-Cola and my, whatever Doritos, I'm good.
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned to you off air, my listeners, anyone in Texas knows that we're in danger of blacking out at any moment here, electricity-wise. Before we go, I want to get you to plug away any content online, any social media presence, do any plugging you'd like to do.
Well, I mean, like I said, I think, my mission is to try to help people. And that's my main rationale why I do what I do. I think the most effective thing I do is something called meetrx.com. That is a community we built. It's a company that's designed to help people, to take people that are sick and make them healthy. And we provide support. I'm there every single day. People that want to ask me questions, I make myself available, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, except when I'm traveling. I can't do it from a plane, but any other time. In fact, tomorrow I got to fly out of town, so I'm missing tomorrow. But generally, every single day I'm there. And we have people, every day I get 50 to 100 people show up in these meetings, and we chat, and we ask questions, and we support each other. And there's round the clock meetings, support people. So that's where I like people to go if they're interested in the carnivore diet or a diet similar, this is where you can get all the information. We got all the information in the world you could ever need, all the support. We got local ranchers you can purchase food from. We have discounts from meat. We've got recipes if you want to be creative. We've got coaching and meetings, all this stuff. So that's what I'm most excited about. I wrote a book called The Carnivore Diet. It's been well received. A lot of people have read it. It's now been translated in several languages. So that's something you can look at. So The Carnivore Diet by Shawn Baker, MD. On social media, Instagram, I'm on there, pissing people off. It's Shawn Baker 1967, SHAWN, and then BAKER 1967. I'm on Twitter, SBakerMD, and I've got a YouTube channel where I usually kind of rant for about 5 minutes a day. And that's, kind of where you can, mostly find me.
Excellent. I'm going to link to all of that in the show notes page for this episode. Shawn Baker, thank you so much for joining us here on Counterflow.
Hey, it's a pleasure, Buck. Appreciate it. Stay warm and what's the temperature like there in Luling today, or Lockhart today?
It's like hovering below freezing. I woke up and it was 9, and now it's like in the 20s.
Is there a projection for when it's going to warm up?
Saturday. And today, as we record this for people listening, it's Wednesday, February 17th. So by the time this comes out next Monday, maybe we'll be in the clear. But it's snowed here like at least a foot in the last few days. Insane.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I lived in Texas for about 20 years, and one year it actually snowed on Christmas in Galveston, Texas.
Oh my goodness.
We had snow on the beach. People were building snowmen on the beach that one year I was there. I thought it was crazy, but that was kind of fun. So, well, stay warm. Hopefully they'll be able to figure out the power supply so that people don't freeze to death. Hopefully you don't have too much of that going on, but yeah, I'm telling you, you've got the biggest head of cattle in Texas. You've got the largest herd in the U.S. You've got 20 million cattle there. Of our 90 million, 20 of a million reside in Texas. Better start cranking up the cow farts. Tell those cows to start farting more.
No
they're not doing their job to warm the planet.
Right. Well put. Shawn Baker, thanks so much, man.
All right. Take care, Buck.
All right. I have to say that interview was shorter than I had prepped for. But as you guys know, we've had these rolling blackouts here in Texas. And that was happening the day that I was to interview Shawn Baker. And he's a pretty big guest. And I didn't want to keep putting him off like, hey, can we switch days? So I went with what I had. I knew I had a short time window to do the interview because the blackouts were hitting my area of Lockhart. And I didn't want that to happen. He was going on with these great answers, and I'm in the back of my mind picturing, oh God, please don't the power just shut off all of a sudden. So I did want to extend that interview, but I knew I was kind of dealing with some things that were out of my control. So I apologize for not getting into more things with Shawn. I wish I could have, but I'm thankful that he was here, and I hope you guys enjoyed the interview. Let's see. Social media presence at Buck Rebel, BuckRebel. You can find my webpage still at the old address, deathtotyrantspodcast.com, but it's been rebranded for the Counterflow podcast, of course. And I keep mentioning this. It's getting bigger. It's blowing up, the Telegram group. Get that Telegram app. Find Counterflow with Buck Johnson, our room. And it's a very good time. I've got a lot of you guys in there. It's really impressive, the stuff you share and the conversations that go on. I'm having a good time chatting with my friends, my listeners to this show. So thank y'all for doing that. If you're not in it yet, jump on in. It's fun. And what else? Electricity's back on in Lockhart, Texas. No more blackouts. Things are looking up. Until next week, I will see you guys later. Talk to you soon.
You get split in fucking half, cause I call him the hologram wrath. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.
This has been the Counterflow Podcast, a part of the Renegade Media Network.